Hello, welcome, Gage Murphy. Uh, so you posted on Twitter last week that you would like to do a little Bible study, and I took you up on that. And the passages for discussion are Genesis 9 and Genesis 19. And these passages refer to inappropriate sexual behavior between children and their parents, drunkenness, and yeah, generational, I don't know, process? How would you put it? What do you think?
I mean, it's definitely related to the way in which the issue of too close versus too far, and
Hmm.
the issue of the relationship between incest and the foreigner, um,
Oh, interesting.
definitely, I think, comes up. Um, it seems like that is constantly being grappled with, especially throughout the early parts of Genesis, is the relationship between, okay, what is the appropriate distance for integration. Um,
Hmm.
and well, I think, and I guess another question that comes with that is, what prompts one to make a decision to integrate too closely, and what prompts one to make decision to integrate too far away, and what are the consequences of that happening? And then why is it that we also see like unique situations where, like, take Moses, who marries a foreigner and is a foreigner, is somehow able to manage it in a way, and I feel like obviously whatever reason that is found within the narrative. Is this something like him figuring out the pattern?
All right. I'm having some thoughts. I think we
Yeah,
should, how about, do you want to read the first, or I'll just read both passages so then
yeah, go ahead.
people have an idea
Sure.
what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So Genesis 9:20 to 27. I like the ESV. So Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." That's only 25, but that seems all right. And then Genesis 19:30 to 38. So this is after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, when Lot and his daughters have lost Lot's wife, and they are alone. Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his two daughters. He was afraid to live in Zoar, so he lived in a cave with his two daughters. The firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father." So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, "Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father." So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He's the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. So yeah, maybe a little too close, a little too near.
Right, right. And I think there's some interesting things going on as far as the fact that, so Lot was a foreigner in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you could say that there's something like, um, whatever hasn't already been said about the affliction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It seems like there's something like a too closeness going on in that city, and that somehow the sin is associated with that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the sexual perversion seems to be in that, in that vein, I guess.
It's a
Um,
it's a dysfunctional integration
yeah, right, right,
because they're rejecting Lot and his family, and they refer to him and say, "Who is he, a stranger, to judge us?" Something
right.
along those lines. When he
Yeah,
was
yeah,
sitting in the gate, and then with the angels, they tried to submit them, and so there's for me, I keep thinking about authority, and yeah, having a name and
totally.
preserving identity. The too
Right,
closeness has to do with trying to hold on to a fixed identity, and the too farness has to do with losing identity.
right, 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 right. And so maybe it's something like it's like you're almost seeing the it going back and forth in terms of him grappling with that. I also think it's very interesting that, you know, in between or just before rather is when Lot's wife turns to stone. And so what I'm reminded of there is I'm reminded of like a lot of different tropes from fairy tales where the fairy tale will start with something like like there was an old king in those days, and the queen had died long ago, and the king had you know what I mean. And so there's an issue where the first thing you want to realize is like, okay, there's an absence of the maternal or the feminine in its proper place, and usually that is part of the key to unlocking the story. And so I mean, it's just very interesting to think about what would have happened if Lot's wife was still around. Well, obviously, you can imagine that probably wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I also think it's very interesting. Like originally, originally the angels tell Lot and his family to go up into the mountains, and then he says no. And then
Right.
right, and then he says no. I'll go to this small town, this neighboring small town. And then he goes to the neighboring small town, sees Sodom and Gomorrah absolutely destroyed, and then he's like, no, we're going to go into the mountains. And so it's like he disobeys them twice, even after he's already tried to change the rules once. And I don't exactly know what's going on there.
It
He seems
reminds Yeah, it reminds me of when Israel failed to go into the land, and then they tried to go into the land.
right, 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 right. That's a good idea.
Yeah. The absence of the parent, I think, is relevant, and because in both situations, like there's a manner in which Lot's daughters are taking the place of their mother,
Right.
but there's also an argument that Ham is taking the place of his father, especially like with the interpretation through Leviticus 18. So Leviticus 18, verse 7 to 8 says, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness."
Right.
So it treats the father and the mother's nakedness as synonymous. And so when Ham uncovers or sees the nakedness of his father, that could actually be a reference to his mother because they're had, they're one.
Yes. Right.
And where the feminine is the body, if he sees his father's body, the father's body is his wife.
Right. Right. And I've always felt like there's this weird split that's going on in that scene where it's like you can almost imagine it when the two are being collapsed into one. And so then you have Noah, who is trying to do something with the wine. I mean, that's maybe a whole nother aspect of a whole nother conversation.
Well, I think
And
it's
then
related.
that leaves him right, right, and that leaves him vulnerable, like through his that leaves his wife vulnerable as being in charge of necessarily protecting her and kind of whatever the relation is there. And it makes sense to me that, thinking back to the Lot situation, I mean, I'm thinking even in like family dynamics, how if you have an absent father, um, and there's a mother and a son, obviously we know the pattern that there is a proclivity to move in that direction because the mother naturally treats the son as a surrogate spouse in that regard, and there's a way in which that movement has a susceptibility when the father role is abdicated. And then you can see the same thing where a father who has a daughter and the mother's not in the picture, and there's a susceptibility for them to fall into that same problem. And there's obviously varying degrees of it. It doesn't need to be a weird thing where they've had sex.
Right.
It oftentimes, you know what I mean? It usually isn't. But usually there's some semblance of an emotional incest that occurs sometimes with those patterns. Again, I'm not speaking
Yeah.
in totality, or at least it's causing one to be vulnerable to it, because one of the major components of the family system is gone. And so it's like trying to like eat on a table that's missing a leg or two.
Yeah. So if the daughter ends up homemaking because of an absent mother,
Right.
that's all, right?
Right.
So making the home, like, in a physical sense, also has to do with producing the children, because the family is the house in that way.
Yes.
But
Right.
there's degrees of it in that you're producing the children if you feed your siblings. Like if you're the one who's
Right.
doing the preparation and the guidance and the scheduling and like managing the goings on of the household. So
Right.
maternal
Right.
role often gets forced onto the eldest daughter. So even in a situation, if you have a single mother who has multiple children and she pushes the eldest daughter into a maternal role, as
Right.
the son also takes a paternal role, and then it's like, yeah, then these children are now self-generating,
Yeah. Right. And it
which
also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I think that the idea of self-generating has to do with authority, in that it's declaring your own name. And I
Right.
think like that is why Ham tells his brothers,
Right.
I have taken our father's position, so now I have the authority of our father.
Right. It almost reminds me of something similar, but it's almost the complete opposite at the same time, of what happens when Joseph shares his dream to his brothers. Now
Mm-hmm.
he's doing it in a very different spirit than the spirit of Ham, because Ham is willfully trying to take the position of leadership, and then therefore wants to rub it in their face to some extent. Whereas Joseph is being given a vision of him doing that and doesn't know what to do with that information. I've often thought it's like Joseph's fundamental mistake possibly was sharing the dream, not because he was sharing it like, haha, look at me. It's very clear from the text that that's not what he's doing. But at the same time, he was given like mystical information, and he threw the pearls to pigs. And that's a very and it's almost him, he's paying for that at the same time. But then there's this weird irony to the story where it's that very fact of him not doing that actually makes it. I mean, all these stories are very ironic
Yeah, yeah,
in a deep sense.
yeah. Because it says that if you throw the pearls before swine, they will turn and devour you. And Joseph's brothers came home with his cloak and said a wild animal had eaten him.
Oh wow, I never even thought about it that explicitly. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right.
So it's pretty
Yeah.
relevant. Um, yeah, with the difference between Joseph and Ham with regards to the authority of their father, like, and how it balances out, is that Ham is grasping for authority while Joseph is receiving authority.
Right.
And so the servant, like where Christ does not consider equality with God something to be grasped,
Oh, yeah.
right? But then through the resurrection, he receives that same authority. All authority
Right.
in heaven and earth has been given to me, right? So
Right.
yeah, so it's engaging in the functional, the serviceable process that generates the authority to be received, versus attempting to grasp the result of that process by bypassing or
Right.
undercutting.
There's a weird irony in authority. It's like I always think about how, you know, Jesus was crowned with an ironic crown in the crown of thorns, but that's actually his crown.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And so that's I mean that's very interesting. And then I also think, I mean, it's interesting thinking about Lot's daughters in that how their view of morality is so different from ours. Not in the sense like, oh, they thought it was right. I more mean in terms of what it is that they value in the way in which they see the world. Like we are so disconnected from the reasons that we do a lot of our base instinctual things. And our morality, like I'm using a spatial metaphor here, where like our morality is like up here and their morality is way lower. It's way more embodied.
Right.
Um,
It's
and so
grounded.
Right. And so like the thing that they're appealing to for doing that, it's like we don't understand why that would be a reason to break such a serious taboo for us, because it's like that there's no connection to us for us towards the sexual act and everything that you were talking about with name and identity and authority. All of those things are actually blind to us modern people, the ways in which those are all related. Whereas they're actually trying to make sense of this and trying to make sense of figuring out a problem in the pattern that they're finding themselves in because of what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very different when your identity, the basis of your identity is less at the level of the individual and more at the level of the family.
Yeah, right, right,
Because we don't identify ourselves as members of a family, as parts of a body. We identify ourselves as distinct bodies. So our primary level of identity is individual, whereas if it's at the level of a family, or your primary level of identity is in the clan or the tribe or the nation, um, then that's going to really modify your behavior and your sense of selfhood with regards to the kind of actions that you're taking, because they're seeing themselves as perpetuating their father's name,
right, right.
something like that. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason that this passage came up for me as something I was trying to make sense of, is trying to understand how thinking about the passage where Lot offers up the daughters to be sexually assaulted by the people of Sodom.
Right.
And because been very interested in lately how the cause and effect nature of things and the way in which like the pattern in some sense reverses,
Yeah.
and how when you're stuck in like a spinning pattern like that, what is the way out? Because it seems like a lot of the biblical stories are about that. They're about something happening and then it producing another effect of its opposite and it getting stuck, and God has to almost raise up someone who will break the pattern and start things anew. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
see that even in the very beginning with the Cain and Abel one, because you can almost say the Cain and Abel story is like the prototype of all of the duality stories that follow in the rest of the book of Genesis, because it's like you have you always seem to have two sons, and they have this kind of bivalent nature to them where they like mimic aspects of the knowledge of good and bad, but obviously it's differentiated at the level now when we're talking about individuals. I mean, they're analogous. They're not. You
Mm-hmm.
can't map them onto each other, but it seems like they're seems like partly what I always see is that the Christ pattern is the pattern of breaking you out of the cycle in a way that doesn't cause you to like force the renewal or keep it going. There's
Mm-hmm.
something like that, and it's very hard to put into words, which is why it's playing it out again and again at analogous levels of the story.
Yeah, it's transcendent. Like when you say God has to raise someone up, like they're being lifted above the cycle. Right.
Right.
So rather than being in a container that's actually one half of a cycle, then the whole cycle becomes a container, and then you're able to navigate it.
Right. Yeah. Right.
You have a
Right.
yeah, you need the a more inclusive map. And then that also has to do with what you're talking about the foreign and the relative, the far and the close. Because when you're stuck inside an element of a cycle, then it's just close, close, close. And then if you're too far removed, then the whole cycle is foreign. But there's a
Right. Right.
balance in between there where it's familiar, but it's not captured you.
Right.
Yeah, and you see that in any kind of opposites, any kind of oppositional structure, like left versus right, or
Mm.
rulers versus ruled
Subject.
subjects. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And as it becomes more removed and you identify more closely, then you become enemies, and then you try to make a name for yourself in opposition to the other aspect of your own cycle.
Right. Right.
And there's a way that, like when you talked about the crown, like because the crown produces blood, and the blood is for atonement. The atonement is a covering, right? So, like the kippah, like the hat, is a covering, right? Because Yom Kippurim is Day of Atonement. Like to atone is to cover over, right?
Right.
And we're covering over our sin, which is our weakness and our failure. So we're covering our failure with the blood of atonement, and then that allows us to have relationship. And wine, being analogous to blood, makes a person blind to their own weakness and their own failure. And then they
Right.
come into a relationship with themselves, which has to do with the self-naming, like the person who believes they can fight, who believes they can dance, who believes they're charismatic, right? They're
Right.
drunk. And
Yeah. Right.
the Bible talks quite a bit, but there's some strong passages about that, about delusion and false belief and false spirits relating to drunkenness, and people who
Right.
do not know that they're drunk because they believe that their perception, their delusional perception, is reality. So they
Mm.
bless themselves in their heart, which has to do with conferring authority on themselves.
Right. Right. Right.
And so the drunkenness in these stories has to do with that. Both of these men became drunk, right? And then their authority became vulnerable, and it became available in some way for someone to take it.
Right. Right.
Someone, yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah. No, I'm just kind of processing that. I think it's interesting to me because there's like this weird level where, as is with all, with most of these things, there's like this weird aspect where drunkenness is like a bad pattern,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better word. But in some sense is also like connected to the way in which things are renewed in the proper sense.
Yeah,
Um,
wine is.
right. Wine in and of itself, right. And so, yeah, no, that's a good point. Drunkenness almost is not taking the elixir of renewal, not
Right.
integrating it properly.
It's too far.
It's too far, right, right,
Because it's an inspirational agent, right? Because
right.
it creates availability, like spiritual availability, but too much spiritual availability causes delusion. You lose, because you lose your reference point. You get too far from the center, lose the reference point, and then become lost. So being drunk is like being lost.
Mm.
The issue being that the person does not know they're lost, and they look at themselves as their own reference point.
Right, right.
And then they cannot accept the truth. A person in that state who has created their own spirit, right, and worships their own spirit, calls the Holy Spirit evil.
Right. It reminds me of similar fairy tale tropes involving like a mirror,
Mm.
or oftentimes when someone looks up at the moon and they see their own face in the moon staring back at them. It's like they're trapped in their
Mm-hmm.
own self-referential cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and they've mistaken everything. I mean, it's partly rather than seeing the moon as the reflection of the sun's light, they see the moon as the reflection of their light beaming from their face, because there's this idea that light beams from our faces in this kind
Mm-hmm.
of weird way. And so it's like it breaks the whole, I mean, at that level it's the whole cosmic structure. um
It's
I think,
narcissism. Yeah.
yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Narcissus, right, he was looking at his reflection in the pool,
Yeah.
and I forget how it ends. Does he drown eventually or something? I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I know that seems like it should be the conclusion.
Right.
I'll look it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, drowned while staring into his own
Yeah.
reflection.
Right, right. That sounds about right.
Yeah, and drowning is related to drunkenness as well.
Right, right. And then so that then begs the question, what do you think's going on? Obviously, there's an infinite number of ways of looking at this, but what do you think's going on at the wedding where Jesus turns the water into wine?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I always remember. I don't know if you had this experience, but I always remember at church, like they'd read this passage and like the that final few like throwaway comments about like they saved the best for last type of thing was like, in some sense like was treated as like that was just like a funny throwaway, and that's never made any sense to me because I don't think that's normally how the Bible works.
Right.
I think
Usually the
so,
words survive because they have meaning.
right, right, right. Like the amount of things that could have been cut, I don't think that was just thrown in. So, like, I've always wondered what's going on there, and the reason I bring this up here is because there's something like weird where I don't know. I've thought about this before in the sense that like is I don't mean this literally, so don't take it literally, but like Jesus is in some sense trying to get them drunk in the proper way. I don't know. What do you think of that?
I think so. I think like so this feels like a bit of a tangent from our original topic, but um just to bring it back a little bit, the ark was the entire world, and it's a fixed, rigid mechanical structure, right?
Right.
So it's a fixed, limited center, and then when he goes into the vineyard, and then with the wine, he goes to an uncentered, unlimited,
Hmm.
right? So it's like overcompensating for the fixity of the
Yeah.
world by trying to regenerate too open of a world.
Yeah. Right.
Um, And then, so at the wedding, like there's a way in which these people were drinking, but the drink was not potent or was not effective or was not
Mm,
sufficient. It was not sufficient to the joy.
right.
And so he gives them more, like he gives them a fullness of wine, right? And what he gives them is sufficient to their joy. So there's a parallel between what he does as his first miracle and clearly Moses' first miracle of turning the water to blood,
Right.
right?
Right.
And part of that is an indication of authority and authority over transformation and over the flesh, right? Whereas the wine
Right.
is more authority over the spirit. So you can look at it as a
Mm,
sign of, I will pour out my spirit, right? And so he
yeah.
offers them a fullness of spirit that provides them with the fullness of joy. And what they're celebrating is a union of coming together
Mhm.
of body and spirit,
Right. 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 Right.
of the
Which is
feminine and masculine.
right, and also the celebration of the incarnation itself
Mm-hmm.
unknowingly. Um,
Exactly. Exactly.
it's like he's celebrating his own act
Yeah.
at it, and then it scales up at every level. Yeah, no,
Mm-hmm.
that's very interesting, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about it's like Jesus seems to be the thing that solves the cyclical pattern problem
Mm-hmm. And
because
he also doesn't grasp it.
no,
He accepts the provocation of his mother.
right, 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 he does. That's right.
So he's not displacing his mother, he's not displacing his father, his heavenly father, because he acknowledges the necessity of his ministry and the beginning of his ministry, but there's a way in which he says, I have not yet begun. So to me it's a reflection of our engagement with Christ,
Mm,
of our
right,
betrothal,
right,
of a promise of a fullness to come, which is fulfilled um, in its way at Pentecost,
right.
which is another promise of a guardian to the wedding. Like it's a
Yeah,
guardian
right,
that's received to the wedding. So
right.
so there's a way in which the Spirit is celebrating and promising this union, and with wine being the substance of spirit, like wine and spirits,
Yeah,
like
right.
so. wine as the substance of spirit, right? Which also blood is, because life is in the blood.
Yes, right.
Yeah, he offers that, and people consume it, right, in joy to celebrate the union. And
Right,
so he
right,
talks about you have no part in me unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. Like, it refers to that as well. Like, the substance of his spirit must
right,
compose you in some way.
right,
Whereas like the substance of the spirit of Noah and Lot is a delusional, a false spirit
right,
that leads, that provokes self-referential authority that is being grasped, which is Luciferian, right?
right.
And so you see that, like, the curse is on Canaan, and then it's cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers, right? So
Mm,
he rejects, so Noah rejects Ham's attempt to grasp authority, and he subjects the child of that, of that possible union of Ham with his mother,
right, right, right,
as the firstborn of the newly modeled family. And he says, no, this child will have no authority. There's no inheritance for him, because he is the son. It iterates again and again that Canaan is the son of Ham. He's not the
right,
son of Noah, right?
right, 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 right. That
So
it ends up, yeah.
yeah, so if Ham, right, if he's a son of Noah's wife, then he's a son of Noah, and he receives a portion of the inheritance. Now Ham is receiving two portions of inheritance. He's stealing the birthright.
Yeah, right, right. And we then you get again see the Jacob Esau parallel.
Mm-hmm. And the blessing ought to remain with the birthright. And so he's claiming the blessing as well, which is the authority of his father, and the birthright being the fruitfulness in the body by taking the body of his mother.
And then because of that problem, that now that there's like a splitting between the birthright and the blessing, where the two should have been one, where they're indistinguishable. It's again where you see like the tree of life splits into the knowledge of the tree of good and bad, and at that point there's an indistinguishability, and and then it's like it goes. The appearances are now no longer saved,
Hmm.
to use that expression, because there's a discrepancy between the beauty of a thing that it's supposed to be pointing to its source to some extent, and now it's they're not in alignment, and so it no longer can point to the originating thing, and that always in some sense results in confusion. It's like that whole concept that's like, well, everything beautiful used to be is what was good, and everything ugly is what was bad. Obviously we know that to not be true, because now all of the relationship between the appearances and the things themselves have been distorted in a fundamental way, where things
Mm-hmm.
no longer can correctly call to what they're trying to point at.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's crazy. Then you have this story right at the beginning of the new world, so to speak, where the splitting of that is happening again, almost similarly to the way it happened again in the garden. And it seems like, I don't know. There's another parallel garden situation happening at a different scale.
Well, you're provoking some thoughts.
Yeah, yeah.
Do um save that though. Parallel garden situation at scale. I'm gonna write that down.
Okay.
Parallel garden at scale, and then I'll provoke you with that later, maybe.
All right. Yeah.
But I've been thinking a lot about the blessing and the birthright. But in this situation, like, Noah is able to resolve, like, he rejects the claim, right? And then blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem, right?
Right.
So the authority is given to Shem, and Japheth also is enlarged, but Japheth is able to dwell in the tents of Shem. So Shem has an inheritance large enough to contain Japheth. So there's an implication that Shem also receives the birthright. So the blessing and the birthright remain with Shem, and then through him, through Eber down the road, it eventually gets to Abraham, and it's through Abraham that it goes to Jacob, right?
Right.
Eventually from Isaac. So,
Are you
but
familiar at all? Sorry, I don't mean to derail you for a second, but are you familiar at all with the legends of the fourth son of Noah?
oh, nope.
Never mind, man. I don't want
Legends.
to derail where you were going, but there's traditions that date back. I'm not just, it's not just like someone said that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
read
someone did say
yeah, someone did say it, but
it. Yeah, yeah.
it
Yeah,
has a little bit more authority than I'm probably making it sound here.
that's all
Um,
right. Someone
about
said something and the existence began, so
right, yeah, true. That's all it takes, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Um, one thing about coverings, I don't know how I something that you had said earlier provoked me to think about coverings.
Hmm.
Um, and oh yeah, not the separation between appearance and what
Reality or
reality. Yeah, appearance and substance.
themselves. Yeah, appearance and substance was the word I was looking for. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and that like in the garden, you see it when they cover themselves with the fig leaves, right? Fig leaves relating to knowledge. And so they try to take the knowledge that they now think that they have from eating the fruit and separate themselves from God with it. And by separating themselves from God, that's a rebellious declaration of self-naming. That's self-authority,
right,
right?
right, right,
So they're becoming self-referential and declaring their own authority. And then God takes that from them and gives them the skin of animals, which
right,
is
right.
which is not the artifice of man, but it's a living expression of God and His creation in the world. And He's like, this is what you can use to mediate relationship with me. It takes the living thing, which is the blood, to
Right.
atone, to cover the weakness, to allow us that's an insulating layer that allows us to come into contact, right? So there's a dysfunctional and a functional way of modifying appearance, right, in order to relate to the substance.
Yeah, right,
and
right.
and we see that here, like because Ham saw or knew the nakedness of his father, implying the body of his mother, perhaps, right? But then
Yeah,
Shem and Japheth, they place the covering, right? And then
yeah,
obviously there's all the references later, especially the most referred to one is often Jacob and Esau with the skin on Jacob's arms and
right, right,
etc. But like you see that with Joseph appearing to be the Pharaoh, and then Joseph appearing to be dead to his father, and then
right.
like the mistaken identity, even like Sodom appearing as a city to Lot's wife, where Lot mistakes the appearance of Sodom for the substance of something valuable, and that
Yeah,
leads her to die, right?
right.
Because it's a self-naming, again, self-generating authority. It's not submitted to God.
It
And
turns
all
literally.
what's yeah, yeah. Yeah, and all of these, when we say self-naming or self-referential authority, what we're talking about is idolatry, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
an idolatry is a delusional spirit that relates back to drunkenness. And
Mm,
when we see idolatry practiced, there's often either drunkenness or the drinking or the consuming of blood related to gratuitous sexual activity.
right, right, right. Yeah, it seems like there's this weird thing where there's like this negative side of the pattern, but then you again will see it again, but it's like taken up into its teleological purpose, so that
Mm-hmm.
even like bad things have a place in the pattern of everything, but that requires like an incredible amount of wisdom in order to understand where does everything fit together in some sense. It's like, what's the prop I mean, that's what wisdom is. What's the proper proportioning, what's the proper placement, what's the proper relation to everything. And it's like you see, and it's very interesting how that in some sense has to be played out between a series of infinite dichotomies, because things present themselves in opposite. You can't have a being implies non-being, and so anytime you have a thing, it implies its opposite. I was thinking about this the other day in reference to, um I mean, this is a gross simplification, but in the sense that like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes are in some sense have opposing messages, and Proverbs is distinguishing the wise from the fool, right? And then Ecclesiastes, obviously I know it's not fully saying this, but there's this aspect of it that's saying, well, the distinction between those two is like doesn't matter. So you have like a collapse. You have a collapse into one, right? In
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes, and then so one is like pure togetherness, and the other one is complete separateness, right? And then you think about it, and then you realize you look at what you're doing with your hands, and you realize that your hands are imitating this hand because now there's a two again. And so it's like I could ask you, well, which
Right,
do you think?
because you have two hands up is what you mean.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And then it goes on infinitely. I mean, there'd be another me that would come in with another two.
Oh, hi, Gage.
Yeah, right. No, but what I mean by that is that it you could ask the question, well, what's better? Is like what's more true about reality? The pattern of Ecclesiastes or the pattern of Proverbs? And if you say, it's like you feel like it's trapped. So you say, well, it's both. Well, to say, well, it's both is a pattern of Ecclesiastes,
Right.
right? Because that's what, or if you say one or the other, then you're just in the pattern of Proverbs. So you may say Ecclesiastes is better, but that's a proverbial pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and what I'm getting at is that there's no way out. Even if you solve the dichotomy at the same level,
Yeah.
it just goes to the next level. And it's that movement of levels that to me is very much a part of life and of spiritual life. And I've been realizing this a lot lately. It's like, it's just get up and die today. You know what I mean? It's like, because you can't solve the problem. So get up and die.
I love that.
Go to the next level and then do it again.
Get up and die today. That's beautiful. I love it.
Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to derail this too much, but
Yeah, so like you said, like wisdom as proportioning and placement, and we're talking about proportioning and placement in space and time. And space is mental, physical, emotional space, right? That implies like some kind of human space that is containing all of those. So human space through experience, which time is.
right.
And in order to do that, you need to be contextually responsive to be able to identify whether or not it's appropriate to be taking a long, large view or approximate and immediate view.
Right.
And that has to do with where you are in the nested structure of multiplicities, right? Whether you're in the proverbial view, because it's hard to swing a hammer at a nail when you're just thinking about how all metal on the earth is a single like quantum linked substance. Like physically you need to be in the proverbial mode of putting them together.
Right.
But once the nail has gone through and those two pieces of wood are now functionally joined, their properties have been transferred into one another and they're sharing in those properties, and that's the ecclesiastical perspective, right? So we are condemned to duality in this reality, but the resolution is in Christ. The resolution into unity is through Christ in the reality of God, who is beyond heaven and earth, who also fills heaven and earth through his Spirit, right?
Right. Because if he was only beyond, he in that sense would fall prey to being stuck in the dichotomy again.
Yeah, like I guess so.
He has to be beyond and both fill.
Yeah. Above and below. But he's not above and below. We just look up and see him, and we look down and see him.
Yeah.
So
we're the ones stuck.
Because we're in the duality.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's our duality. It's a duality of perception, not a duality of nature that he has. So
yes, right.
Yeah, and people become unsatisfied and they become frustrated, right, by their inability to dictate a unity, because stability is sought. People are seeking a fixity of place, right? A definition of identity that they have in space through time that's fixed, that they can use as a control to reference for action. But that fixing of identity, they're nailing something in and treating it as if It's like putting a nail into a house and pretending that the nail is holding the house. And
Right.
that's the self-naming, self-generating authority and the vanity of the idolatrous man,
Right. 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 Right.
which is what both Lot's daughters and Ham seem to be participating in, with both the masculine and the feminine aspect, because Ham is taking the name for himself, and the daughters are trying to choose to generate it on behalf of, but
Right.
they're controlling the generation.
And that pattern then propagates towards being the spirit that resides over an entire peoples
Mm.
with all three. I mean, with Canaan, and with the Amorites, and then
The Ammonites and the Moabites.
yeah, right, right,
And you see the conflict that they have with Israel, who is the child of promise, not the child of choice, which is Ishmael.
right, 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 right,
The grasped child, the taken child, rather than the received child, which is Jacob
right, right,
or Isaac or Joseph or Christ or David or
right.
whatever. Yeah.
So then it, in some sense, it's like, I mean, to really make this practical, it's like I know, last time we talked, we were talking a lot about, like, I don't know, we were just kind of exploring the space that we both find ourselves in, as
Mm-hmm.
far as, participation in the online world and different tools and options and projects available to us. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder how this plays in here, in the sense that I, I don't know how much you've been following kind of some of the stuff that's been going on in this little corner, so to speak, recently, but
I haven't.
maybe for the best. No, I don't know. No, I just mean there's been a lot of conversations about, like, a lot of conversations about how much do you grab at, like, making a YouTube channel and becoming, like, making a name for yourself in some sense. And right, because there's trade-offs, right? It's like there's a constant trade-off relationship. And I
There
bring this up
seems to be.
not to shame anybody's choices, because I actually just don't know. Um, but I know some people really care deeply. Some people feel like betrayed by some people for maybe moving beyond a level of locality. And then other people, like, feel like, well, you're just preventing them from having reach, and all, these types of relationships. And I constantly find myself in that type of situation where it's like, marketing is both, like, you can't just ignore it, because you could then try and be self-righteous in the sense that you don't market yourself in anything, and there's always a way you'll be a hypocrite in that. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, there is a truth in the fact that marketing is inherently some sort of a selling of your soul, to some extent, if you think about it in the way in which it lacks a sense of organicness and is like a yourself in the appearances.
It can be. I had a conversation about that yesterday. The concept of authenticity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Authenticity
yeah,
is a good word in
yeah, and
this room.
genuineness of connection. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting because, like, should I have a YouTube channel? No, because that's having mode, right?
Okay. Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Should I be someone who makes themselves available for dynamic and revelatory conversations with other people? Yes, because that's being mode.
Right.
Um, you want to be in the service. If you're thinking about having reach or having notoriety or having attention, then you're shortcutting and you're attempting to grasp the authority for yourself. The authority is
Right.
not the result of arbitrary distribution. The authority, the blessing, is um, the capacity to steward the resources that you have. And it
Right.
is
Right.
through responsible stewardship that the multiplication happens. And then the authority grows because it is stewarding a multiplied resource. So as you increase breadth, you increase height necessarily. People who want to ascend to the heights without having the breadth are not going to have the stability of structure to be able to withstand pressure, and that structure, that artifice will crack, right? And they'll crack inside, or they'll crack publicly, whatever. But it's going to be destructive. So
Right.
I believe that we have a responsibility to exercise our gifts and to bear an increase of them.
Mm.
Right. And in an age of digital leverage, ignoring the digital tools that we have, I think is irresponsible, because the enemy is certainly using them. And the key is to use them in the purpose that God has given you to serve. That's my opinion.
Right.
And whatever people think about it, whatever people think about your image or your appearance or whatever, that says more about them than it does about you. So be that as it may, there's going to be the thing about marketing is that you want to create opportunities for people to have that relationship with yourself or with your ideas, right? And so there's an experience like what we're having right now. Like, this is the core of my process. I've decided that conversations like this are going to be the pillar against which my online function rests.
That's smart. Getting on something like this.
Thank you. And then that's the trunk, and then there's branches, and so the branches are the relationships that's created when somebody observes this or watches this.
Right.
And then there's leaves, right? And the leaves are clips or posts that are generated from the content that we come up with here.
Right.
And leaves are generally the first thing you see of a forest, right?
Right.
So people will see the leaves and they'll think, oh, that's not authentic or that's not genuine, simply because the leaves don't contain the core.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? But in the same way that illumination decreases as you move from the center of light, right? It's because the area is increased. You have a diffusion of identity that happens as you broadcast.
Right.
So you're broadcasting, right? So if I dropped all the seed at my feet, they would be in one pile. But if I broadcast the seed, then they will be scattered far from me. The seed,
Right.
yeah, and then the fruit is diffuse, right? Because you'll have a plant here, a plant there. It's a diffusion. But if the diffusion is gathered around a stable center, then those all become access points that people can eat from that has grown in the periphery and follow it to the nourishment that is available in the center.
Right. Yeah.
So people who are subject to marketing, right, who are allowing themselves to be drawn in to a given center, are making choices of identity. And as they follow that, they are putting on or participating in the identity that is at that center.
And so that's why the issue of the center, and it's more about a compromise of the center than it is any outward movement from the center.
Yeah, because the outward movement, that seed is going to be, because the Satan comes and he sows seed in the field, and that seed creates tares.
Right.
The farmer sows seed and it creates wheat, and you can't tell the seed, you can't tell the plants apart until the moment of fruitfulness is tested, whether the weight of the fruit bends the neck of the stalk of wheat or not.
Right.
So the broadcasting has to happen. That's what it means to be fisher for men. You're throwing hooks out. People talk about hooks on a Twitter post. It's like, yeah, we're all trying to hook, right? We're trying to catch fish,
right,
in our nets. But like, to what is it offered? Are you offering those fish to yourself, or are you offering them to Christ? Are you setting them free to fulfill their own purpose and discover an identity that is to be revealed in them, or are you submitting them to your own identity and to your own authority?
Right.
And I think, and there's an issue that people have, I think, when they have a certain relationship and with another person, and then they see that, like you say, that center's elevating because it's broadening and it's being lifted, but they perceive that as the person is leaving them, they're abandoning them. Right. but it's a challenge. Like, you can follow if you grow and share as well, right? And it's important to accept the position that you're in and the opportunities that you have, and to fulfill those opportunities. If you have one talent, you're expected to create another talent. If you have
Right,
10, you're expected to create 10.
right, right.
So,
Yeah, I mean, and in some sense, it's like, I don't know. As you were thinking about that, I was thinking about how, it's like you could almost say that, Frodo is like a proper seed with a
mhm,
proper center, um, and then therefore, it's like he almost. I'm kind of extending an analogy here, but it's like when he says at the Council of Rivendell, when he says, "I will take the ring to Mordor," it's like that's him making the decision, but purely not out of a having mode at all. Clearly, I mean, he wishes the ring never came to him. Um, but he recognizes what he sees everyone fighting about it, and he recognizes, okay, this is like I can't do anything else other than carry the ring. You know what I mean? Like he knows, like it's not really a talent, but you know what I mean. At the spiritual level, it's like none of these people can clearly carry the ring. Now I don't know the way. I'm not going to be able to kill a single orc, but I can carry the ring, and therefore I have to carry the ring because it's actually my teleological end, and
yeah,
so therefore that's the proper ring bearer, is someone who has that ontological stance.
yeah.
And I think that I don't know, that frames it well for me.
As he carries the ring, right? Um, the fellowship accompanies him, and
Right.
then they lose members. Well, they lose their brain. They lose Gandalf. Um, but then the fellowship breaks, and it's
Right.
like they watch. They know that Frodo is going, and they cannot go with him. But
Right.
they don't envy Frodo or demand that he stay, because they're attached to this relationship and to this
Mm,
fixity of identity in space through time. They allow it to change and to
right.
shift, and they, like, Aragorn submits himself to his responsibility, and it's through that he becomes glorified.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And
Right.
his responsibility is to face the army of the enemy, and Frodo's responsibility is to face the center of the enemy. So Aragorn faces his expression, and Frodo faces his nature.
And they both, by both of them doing that, they allow the other one to do their given thing.
And they overcome the substance and the appearance of the enemy together.
Right. 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 And you can see in some sort, like even the way that that at the Black Gate, the mirror, it's like Aragorn the king is leading his troops right in front of the Black Gate, all while, so both, like, Mordor is being stormed on all sides by the two aspects.
Mm-hmm.
That final moment.
Yeah, the appearance of goodness is Aragorn's army, because that's what draws Sauron's eye, and the substance
Right,
of goodness is Frodo's willingness to carry the ring.
right, right, right.
So the substance and appearance of goodness overcome the substance and appearance of hatred and death. Yeah.
And both Aragorn and Frodo were somewhat unwilling participants, not in terms of that they were grabbed and thrown into and forced into doing it, but in the sense that they they didn't try to grab at it,
They
right?
waited until it was necessary to receive.
Where they knew that they had to do it, right? And they
Boromir attempt yeah. Boromir tried to grasp it,
right, right, right,
and Aragorn received it. He would
right,
not go
right.
into the city, right? Till he was invited.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, and I mean, when thinking about that pattern that we were just talking about, I mean that it's like it's when I start to pay attention to my life, so much of that comes up so much, in so many different little micro decisions and micro dynamics in life, of
Mm-hmm.
that knowing how to properly wait and water my seed in some extent, and
Mm-hmm.
reflect on the character of my seed, and then learn how to not I definitely have the tendency to be someone like, if I had the ring, right, and I, rather than saying I will take the ring to Mordor, I would say something like, well, some like I would evade the responsibility of it, not because I don't want to take the responsibility, but because I fear. I mean, for me to even make the comment I did about marketing, I clearly like my basic mode is to fear that movement toward power,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm so afraid. It's that say like I don't want to become. It's like Aragorn. I don't want to become Isildur, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I never know when to take the opportunity and recognize that I'm being elevated into it, not because I'm taking it, and
Yeah.
I have to let the wave sometimes bring me when the wave comes, and
Yes,
yeah, go ahead.
you will be carried up. As you fulfill your responsibility in the level that you're operating on, that level will become complete, and then you will add to it. And in the adding to it, it will grow and expand.
Right, right, right,
And then now you're stewarding an increase, and Christ demands an increase. All the parables,
right,
right?
right,
Bearing seed of 10, 30, 60, 100 times.
right,
It's all about growth. And if you don't grow, you die, right? And so
right.
Moses Moses had to go and lead the people out of Egypt and had to judge Pharaoh and exercise authority over the nation in order to fulfill the gifts that God had given him. Like, you grew up 40 years in the Egyptian court, you spent 40 years stewarding in the wilderness. Now take those things, put them together, and lead a nation.
Right, right,
And
right.
and if you refuse your responsibility, you will die. And there's a picture of that, and when he stands on the road to kill him, right?
Mhm.
Like, you can fulfill the purpose that God put in front of you, or you can reject him. Like,
Right.
it's it's serious.
You will go into a whale. I mean, that's the epitome of death.
Exactly.
Is the big
Yeah.
fish that swallows you up if you reject the purpose.
Yeah. And then when you accept the purpose and repent, then you find newness of life.
Right, and it seems like
Jonah's resurrected.
right, right, and like, and then in Joseph, I mean, Joseph just seems to. I mean, Joseph's positioning to that willingness of whatever you have for me, Lord,
Mm-hmm.
is he. It's a self-emptying, like a kenosis of some sort, where he provides the openness, and because he provides that openness, he no longer even has the capability to just grasp, because he's emptied the grasping aspect of himself, and then therefore remains as a vessel constantly being filled, and
Yes.
he doesn't see the final threads. But that's why it's like, it's the, blessed are you who you know or you believe because you've seen, blessed are those who, because of you, who have not seen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the pattern. It's like, I don't see the end of all things at all, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm still coming when it goes.
Yeah.
I
The
mean,
end
the
is antelos.
have been out of the Shire, so that it's like they're the least able to have faith that something like that could happen, because their world is so small. But they don't. It's not about how your perspective, in some sense, it's so small. It's the willingness in heart and in spirit.
Yeah. To submit to your responsibility.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because Joseph fulfills his purpose within his family, and then he's cast out, and he fulfills his purpose within Potiphar's household, and then he's cast out,
Mhm.
and he fulfills his purpose within the prison, and he's cast out, and then Pharaoh puts a signet on his finger, and he fulfills his purpose in Egypt.
Right.
So, regardless of the scale, it's important not to identify the scale with your own identity. It's your
Right.
identity as a subject and a member of Christ, and the
Right.
glory is his, and it belongs to him because he is the one who judges all things. So that is the unity and where the conclusion of the identity rests. So, like you said, the end of all things, or
Right.
the goal of all things. So yeah, And Ham and Lot's daughters, in that instance, they didn't do that. Tried to take the ring.
Right, right. They did try to take the ring, and you see how that the ring obviously is a closed circle. So that goes back to what we were saying before, how it therefore you're now trapped in the circle, and and there's going to have to be a sacrifice that's made in order for the ring to be destroyed, the closed ring that keeps you stuck.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And then the tree of
the generations are cursed up to a certain amount, but the righteousness is cursed like what, sevenfold or something like that, or not cursed, blessed
right.
sevenfold.
Way more, yeah, because it's the ring and the tree.
Right.
Everyone finds its tree.
Right. It's interesting how you see, right, that the symbolism there is so fascinating, because it's oftentimes you see the ring surrounding the tree, right? I mean, that's oftentimes you'll see the ring surrounding the tree, or it's even actually it's like not.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's like it's Frodo and Aragorn right there. No.
Well, that seems good.
Yeah, I think so.
Is there anything else? That feels like a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just as a last thing I'll say is I think for me, like, reading that passage, sometimes it's like if you just focus on all the way the pattern is solved in some sense, it's like Christ is solving all of these patterns that are going on earlier in Genesis, right? It's like, but you have to go back to Genesis and rest in the problem of the pattern in a deep level in order for what Christ is doing to really truly connect. And so you're living in both, right? You're living in the experience of the split and the alienation and getting stuck in the cycle, and then recognizing how, I mean, it's like what we ended on. It's like you cannot grab your way into the kingdom of heaven at all. And if you try and grab your way into the kingdom of heaven, it's like that's what this looks like.
Yeah.
In these stories in Genesis. And it almost, in some sense, because they're such primordial stories, they're setting up the pattern of mankind and why a solution of the utmost is required. And in our modern world, it's the grabbing has only accentuated with increased technologies, and the ultimate grab is probably on the horizon.
Yeah, could be.
Well, it just depends on how long your horizon is, I guess.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That was very stimulating. So hopefully that provides some fodder for people to ruminate, and maybe some insight is afforded. And don't take the results of someone's service, but submit yourself to service. So,
right.
Yeah.
Get up and die every day.
Amen.